Ahlan wa sahlan bikum. Welcome to Lingo Village, your first lesson in learning the Arabic alphabet. We're going to start you with the non-connected letters, and the reason for that is because technically they have 4 positions: independent, initial, medial, and final, just like every other letter in the Arabic alphabet. Some of them look the same, so it's easier to memorize. So we'll start you with that, and then we'll move on to some more difficult letters that have all 4 connections that look different from one another. We're going to introduce some vocabulary into these writing sections just so that you can see how each letter looks in every position. It's very important that you begin to recognize right away what each letter looks like in the independent, initial, medial, and final position. Now, that also means a couple things. First, it means that we're going to have to use letters that you don't yet know, because we want to use real words and not fake, nonsense words, just so that you can be able to see what it looks like. We'll use real words. However, you don't have to memorize them right away. These words, these vocabulary items that we'll use to introduce the alphabet are elementary level words. We specifically chose them in order to be able to reinforce your vocabulary later on. So these words won't be unfamiliar when you encounter them in your elementary level lessons. So the first is alif. Alif. Here is alif in the isolated position. Initial position, notice it's the same as the isolated. Medial position. And final position. Notice final and medial are also the same. Alif tends to have a few different pronunciations. The first would be a, as in the name of the letter, alif. Another would be as in elf, which incidentally has the same spelling as alif, but with slightly different vowel variations. So a, and then a, as in shal, shal, which means to carry, he carried. Now we've seen alif pronounced 3 different ways. A as in alif, as in elf, and a as in shal, a. We've also seen it written in the initial position, alif and elf, and in the medial position, shal. Now we're going to look at alif in its final position, Libya. Libya. Libya, of course, is the name of the Arab country, Libya. Now we're going to skip a few letters. We're not going to do this in order. Again, this is because we're introducing you to the non-connected letters. We're going to skip to the next non-connected letter in the alphabet, which is dal. Dal. Dal is the name of the letter. The pronunciation of a dal is very similar to an English D. Dal. Da. Da. It's the same thing. The point of articulation is behind the top row of the teeth, where your tongue meets your gums. Dal. We're using 2 lines on these pages for illustrative purposes, that is, to show you exactly the shape of each letter. You'll be using just 1 line, of course, in real writing. Notice that the top of dal is over halfway up the line on your page, unlike many other letters we're about to encounter. In its first position, we can look at a word like da. It's pronounced da. Da means this. Da means this. Next, we're going to look at another place name, which ought to be familiar just by listening to it. Jeddah. Jeddah. Jeddah is the name for Jeddah, the city in Saudi Arabia. Now we'll look at the name Walid. Walid, featuring dal in the final position. Now we'll turn to dhal. Dhal. Dhal is the name of this letter in Fusha, which is modern standard Arabic. However, dhal does not really exist in Egyptian. The letter exists, however, it's not pronounced as a the, as you might find in standard Arabic. It's zal. Often you'll hear Egyptians refer to the name of the letter as zal, not dhal. So it's pronounced as a zain or a zay, which we'll get to just a moment. First word we're going to talk about here is Zeki. Zeki. It's a name, as in Ahmed Zeki, a very famous Egyptian actor, and it also means intelligent or smart, clever. Zeki. Zeki. Next we'll look at Zal in its medial position, which incidentally, of course, looks the same as it would in its final position. The word is Yizakir. 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 Yizakir means he studies. He studies. The next letter we'll look at is Ra. Ra. The name of the letter is Ra. It has two different pronunciations. If you speak Spanish, this will be very easy for you to learn. Ra is a flap. Your tongue flicks the top of your gums just behind your teeth. That's called the alveolar ridge. Ra, 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 ra. It also rolls sometimes. Just as it does in Spanish, it does the same thing in Arabic. Ra. So, ra and ra. The first word we'll look at is a borrowing from English, so it should be very familiar. Radio. Radio. We can see ra in the medial position in the word mudarris. Mudarris. Mudarris means teacher. The last word we're going to look at is wazir. Wazir. Wazir means minister, someone in government. Wazir. The next letter we have is zay or zin. It can be pronounced either way. It also happens to follow ra in the alphabet. Zay or zin. In its initial position, we have the word zayt. Zayt. Zayt means oil. Zayt zaytun is olive oil. Very, very common in the Middle East. Zayt. Zayt. The z, as you can hear, the zin, is pronounced almost identically to an English z. Z. Next we have a really common verb. It's nizl. Nizl. The zin appears here in the medial position. Nizl. It means generally to go down. To go down. To descend. Nizl. Finally we have a borrowing from English. Inglese. Inglese. The zin appears here at the end of the word. Zin is in its final position in Inglese. Inglese. You can take a good guess as to what Inglese means. Our last non-connected letter is wow. 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 In its initial position, we'll return to a word we've already gotten before. Wazir. Wazir. Wa is pronounced like the English W. Wa. It's also often pronounced, when as a vowel, a oo or o. U, o, and wa are the pronunciations of wow. Wazir. Wazir. Wow appears in the initial position. Again, it means minister. In the medial position, we take the word for long, which is tawil. Tawil. Tawil means long. Wow, again here, is pronounced as a wa, not an u or o. However, in the final position here, in this particular word, we do have wow appearing as an o. Radio. That does it for our unconnected letters. Congratulations, you already know your first 6 letters in Arabic. Now let's move on to something a little bit more complicated, in which we have our connected letters. That's the rest of the alphabet. Good luck.